In Terms of Art, an introduction to art discussion involving the works of Frida Kahlo by Matthew Hans. In order to discuss these works of art, we must first have an understanding of the following terminology. Medium, or the tools, substances, and surfaces that artists use to make their work, such as paint or canvas. The composition is the use of colors, lighting, or even shadows, and different shapes, and how they work together in the layout or the design of the painting to tell the viewer a story. Subject matter is what the artist is actually painting, like people, places, things, rather than how they're placed, referring to composition, of course. Style is best described as the method used by the artist to express his or her work. Realism is a style on which the artist paints in a way that shows the viewer a picture of things as they are, no touching up or glamour as often seen with celebrities. Naturalism is a style that prioritizes in being accurate to how the world actually looks, whereas surrealism is a fantastical style used to convey an artist's imagination. Artists can blend different styles as they see fit to express themselves. Expressive content is what the artist is trying to evoke from his or her viewer, like what feelings do you feel, what the story in the painting is telling you through the images or colors represented in the painting, that kind of thing. The first painting that we're going to look at is The Little Deer, which was painted in 1946, again by Frida Kahlo. The mediums that were used to paint this were oil paints, which use an oil base, and masonite, which is the type of cheap hardwood that, with varying uses, and one of those uses, of course, being for artists to paint on. It's textured, which kind of adds a different character element to the design of the painting. The composition for this painting overall is pretty dark. The shadows and the dead trees give the painting a somber tone. The main figure is centralized in the image, but appears to not be the sole focus of the painting. The trees, which this is kind of blending into subject matter, of course, and the path give a sense of depth leading to the sea and the storm. However, those swirling, ominous clouds and lightning riddle the backdrop. The foreground has a branch that's cut down, adding to the image of death ahead that's already portrayed by this image. The image of ominous despair or death is at the core for the subject matter of this painting. The deer, the branch, the trees, the storm in the background. For example, the sea and the storm appear lighter, giving that there's almost a sense of light at the end of the tunnel, but that freedom at the end of this tunnel is barred by the lightning that comes down from the sky, saying that none shall pass, even if you are able to somehow make it, which it seems apparent that the deer is not going to make it, having arrows in its body. The style, while initially is surreal, given that there's a human head on a deer's body, you take an in-depth look at the hints of naturalism and realism, though, that are present as far as the deer's body being painted accurately. The head is accurate, even though it's attached to a deer's body. So there are some hints of a blending of different styles. Ultimately, the expression that is presented is one of despair and almost sorrow. The human head is present on the deer to better show the sadness and despair and the sorrow of the creature, while also giving us a face with relatable expressions that can invoke that message in us. Ultimately, the downward stare of the deer, and given the conditions of the surrounding her, causes the viewer to feel sorrow and sympathy. I know that's what I feel. The next painting is Self-Portrait 2. This was painted in 1940. This image was a lot larger than the previous image. The previous image was only just over 8 inches by just over 11 inches. This one is almost 24 inches tall by almost 16 inches wide. Again, the artist uses oil paint on masonite, and like the previous painting, it adds a little bit of texture to the image as far as like the clothing goes and the different things that are there. The composition and subject matter of this The subject matter is obviously spring or early summer. There's lots of green growth in the background. There's buds popping up ready to bloom. In her hair, Callow's got flowers and buds. The composition, though, doesn't represent the typical colors of spring. It's a darker sky rather than a brighter blue. In fact, there appears to be no source of real light in the painting, no sun coming out. Everything's kind of in shadow and muddled. Shadows on the clothes and face kind of do give a sense of depth, but they're not as represented in the background with the leaves and the sky. Around her neck is even a thorn necklace, coupled with scratches on her skin that, when you add that to her stare, seem to tell us that even though it's spring, often representative of life and rebirth and joy even most of the time, that she does not see the world that way, almost feeling kind of trapped, again going back to that thorn necklace. We know from her background that she had a lot of physical problems in life, which often confined her to her bed. And this kind of takes us to like the style, I guess, and the expressive content that's trying to be displayed here. That it's pretty realistic, the style, and it only adds really to the attitude and feeling that she's trying to portray. It's one of longing to belong, but unable to really enjoy the world around her. She acknowledges, as she wears that headdress, she's acknowledging that the world around her exists, but when she looks away, she's almost telling us that it's not the same for her. This final painting is self-portrait with a monkey. The previous painting, of course, being Self-Portrait 2. This was done in 1938. The size is a little smaller than the previous portrait, but also much larger than the first painting, being 16 inches tall and 12 inches wide. Again, Kahlo uses oil and masonite. Again, it brings that same kind of textured look to the painting, which adds a lot of character when I look at it. The composition and subject matter of this painting, really the tone of this painting appears warmer than the previous two. Her skin is a deeper tan or orange, and it reflects, there's a reflection in her hair of like the green from the foliage that's around her. The surrounding plant life seems to be more vibrant. The background sky doesn't play as large of a role in this image, in this painting, compared to the other two, yet it's also easy to see that there's a higher contrast between that sky and the leaves. It makes it appear more blue. Things aren't as dark or gloomy. The image ultimately is lighter. The only dark parts of the image really are her hair or the monkey's hair. As far as style goes, there's a very realistic and natural representation in this image. You could say that there's a little bit of surrealism with how tall her neck is, but as far as the monkey goes and how it appears to kind of add to Kahlo's stare, there is very little shadow, for example, underneath her chin, which makes the neck appear longer, giving a sense of almost looking up at her. She's proud. She doesn't have us looking down on her in pity or sorrow. She's content. She's not quite maybe confident, but she's definitely content with where she's at. And that's kind of the feeling that I get when I look at this painting, is really one of satisfied content, not really heightened senses of joy or sorrow, that were represented in the previous two. Now, we looked at these images backwards as far as their time of release goes, but I'd like to just take a look at these images one more time here. The first image that, as far as chronologically, came out in 1938. This is the self-portrait with the monkey, and it shows Kahlo content with her life. She struggled with illness throughout her life, but at this point in her life, it appears that despair hasn't quite gripped her yet. It hasn't taken its toll. Fast forward 2 years later to 1940. This is for Self-Portrait 2. We take a look at her differing perspective on the world. It's just 2 years later, but she's already expressing that she just feels trapped by the circumstances in her life, that she's really unable to enjoy the beauty that's around her, that she still tries to portray as far as the subject matter goes, but as far as the composition of the painting, it really doesn't give us a sense of joy or beauty or life. We really kind of get that trapped sense of almost despair, of just not really happy. We feel a little sorrow for her, not really understanding exactly what she's going through, but still she's able to express those feelings in this painting. We do know that between the last painting and this one, that she had divorced her husband in 1939 after having a pretty rough relationship, and so that could add to some of the feelings that she's expressing here. The last painting was painted in 1946, The Little Deer, and perhaps at this time Kahlo felt kind of at the end of her rope. It's hard to know exactly what someone's going through, but based on what she's expressing in her painting, I found myself sorrow for the struggle and the troubles that she's going through. As surreal as it is, having a head on a deer and trying to understand what's going on with that, when you take a deeper look at it, you really get to feel sorrow for the situation that's going on, and ultimately it seems what the artist is going through in their life.